All right, folks, let's talk about World War II, the biggest, most destructive conflict in human history. Buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride through 6 years of absolute chaos. So the war in Europe kicked off in September 1939 when Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. This was the moment everyone had been dreading but hoping wouldn't actually happen. Using these brand new blitzkrieg tactics, which basically means lightning war, Germany rapidly overwhelmed Poland. We're talking tanks, planes, and mobile infantry all working together at speeds nobody had ever seen before in warfare. The country was quickly overtaken, and honestly, the world was absolutely shocked. Nobody expected Poland to fall that fast. Britain and France, who had defense agreements with Poland, responded by declaring war on Germany. But here's the weird part. They didn't really do anything about it. They declared war and then just kind of sat there. This period became known as a phony war because even though these countries were technically at war, there wasn't much actual fighting going on. It was like everyone was waiting to see who would make the first real move. Well, that didn't last long. In 1940, Germany decided to stop messing around. German offensives rapidly defeated Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in quick succession. Yeah, France, one of the most powerful militaries in Europe, fell in just 6 weeks. 6 weeks. That's how effective the German blitzkrieg was. The British Army, meanwhile, was basically running for their lives. They got pushed all the way back to the beaches at Dunkirk, where they had to be evacuated across the English Channel in one of the most dramatic rescue operations in military history. Hundreds of civilian boats crossed the Channel to help save the British troops. It was a defeat, but somehow the British managed to spin it into this moment of national determination. After France fell, Britain was left standing alone against the Nazi war machine. Germany then attacked Britain directly during what became known as the Battle of Britain and the Blitz. German planes bombed British cities night after night, trying to break their will and destroy the Royal Air Force. However, and this is huge, the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, failed to defeat the IAF. The British pilots, flying Spitfires and Hurricanes, held the line. Hitler had wanted to invade Britain, but without air superiority, that wasn't going to happen. So Britain survived, barely, but they survived. In June 1941, Hitler made what many historians consider his biggest mistake. He invaded Russia under the code name Operation Barbarossa. This was a massive gamble. Germany was already fighting Britain, and now they were opening up a second front against the Soviet Union with its seemingly endless supply of soldiers and vast territory. Napoleon had tried invading Russia, and it destroyed his empire. Hitler apparently didn't learn from history. Then in December 1941, everything changed again. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and just like that, the United States was dragged into the war. What had started as a European conflict was now truly a world war, with fighting happening across multiple continents and oceans. Let's talk about the main players here. Germany, Italy, and Japan formed what they call the Axis powers. These were the bad guys, basically fascist regimes bent on conquest and domination. On the other side, Britain, Russia, the Soviet Union, and the USA made up the major combatants on the Allied side. You also had tons of other countries involved, Canada, Australia, China, and dozens more, but those big three were the heavy hitters doing most of the fighting. Now here's where things get truly dark. In 1942, the Nazis implemented what they called their final solution, a systematic plan to exterminate all Jewish people in Europe. This wasn't just war anymore. This was genocide on an industrial scale. The Holocaust would claim the lives of 6 million Jews, along with millions of others the Nazis deemed undesirable. It remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. But back to the military side of things, because some critical battles were about to happen that would dramatically change the entire course of the war. Up until this point, the Axis powers had been winning pretty much everywhere. But that was about to change. First up was the Battle of Midway in the Pacific Theater in June 1942. The Japanese Navy had been dominating the Pacific, but American forces managed to sink 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in this battle. It was a turning point. Suddenly Japan was on the defensive instead of the offensive. Then came El Alamein in Egypt in November 1942. British forces under General Montgomery defeated the German Afrika Korps led by the famous Desert Fox Erwin Rommel. This stopped Germany's advance in North Africa and marked the beginning of their retreat from the region. But the big one, the battle that really broke Germany's back, was Stalingrad in Russia, which ended in January 1943. This battle was absolutely brutal. We're talking house to house, room to room fighting in the freezing Russian winter. The German Sixth Army was completely surrounded and destroyed. It was the first time an entire German army had been wiped out, and it shattered the myth of German invincibility. From this point on, Germany would be retreating in the east. These three battles, Midway, El Alamein, and Stalingrad, happened within about 8 months of each other, and they completely shifted the momentum of the war. The Axis powers had been stopped, and now the Allies were going to start pushing back. The next huge moment came on June 6, 1944, a date known simply as D-Day. The Allies launched Operation Overlord, invading Normandy, France. This was the largest amphibious invasion in history, with thousands of ships carrying hundreds of thousands of troops across the English Channel to storm the heavily fortified beaches of Nazi-occupied France. The fighting was absolutely savage, especially at places like Omaha Beach where American troops took massive casualties. But they held on, established a beachhead, and began the liberation of Western Europe. From this point on, Germany was being squeezed from both sides, the Soviets advancing from the east and the Western Allies pushing from the west. Speaking of the Soviets, the Red Army was absolutely steamrolling through Eastern Europe at this point. They'd been fighting Germany for nearly 4 years and had suffered incredible losses. We're talking tens of millions of Soviet citizens dead. But they kept coming, and their industrial capacity, combined with American Lend-Lease supplies, meant they had more tanks, planes, and guns than Germany could ever hope to match. The Red Army advanced relentlessly in the east and was the first to reach the German capital of Berlin in April 1945. The Battle for Berlin was a final showdown. Soviet forces surrounded the city and fought their way through it block by block, building by building. Adolf Hitler, hiding in his bunker beneath Berlin as Soviet shells rained down on the city above, realized it was over. On April 30th, 1945, he committed suicide rather than face capture. About a week later, on May 8th, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. The war in Europe was over, but the war in the Pacific was still going. Japan refused to surrender even as American forces island-hopped their way closer and closer to the Japanese home islands. The fighting was incredibly brutal, with Japanese soldiers often fighting to the last man rather than surrendering. Then came the moment that would end the war but also usher in a new and terrifying age. On August 6, 1945, the Americans dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The blast instantly killed tens of thousands of people and leveled the entire city. 3 days later, they dropped a second atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Faced with this unprecedented destruction and the threat of more atomic bombs to come, Japan finally surrendered on what became known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, August 15, 1945. The war was finally over. World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945, 6 long, brutal years. It remains the most geographically widespread military conflict the world has ever seen. Fighting took place in Europe, Africa, Asia, the Pacific Islands, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Literally every continent except Antarctica saw some kind of military action. The numbers are almost impossible to comprehend. Somewhere between 70 and 85 million people died in World War II. That's about 3% of the entire world's population at the time. Entire cities were destroyed. Countries were devastated. The Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others. The atomic bombs introduced weapons that could literally end human civilization. But it also showed humanity's capacity for courage, sacrifice, and resilience. It ended the age of empire and colonialism. It led to the creation of the United Nations. It established human rights as a global concern. The world that emerged from World War II was fundamentally different from the one that had entered it. World War II shaped the entire second half of the 20th century and continues to influence our world today. It's a reminder of both the worst and the best that humanity is capable of, the horrors of war, genocide, and totalitarianism, but also the courage to stand against evil and the determination to build a better world from the ashes.